CBS News projects that Governor Gavin Newsom has actually won the recall election in a landslide victory, in fact. As of now, nearly 64% of voters have cast their ballot in support of keeping Newsom in office. The governor faced a now failed Republican-backed effort to oust him over his pandemic response. Homelessness and rising food and gas prices across the state were also big issues. Less than an hour after the polls closed, Newsom addressed his supporters.
I'm humbled and grateful to the millions and millions of Californians that exercise their fundamental right to vote and express themselves so overwhelmingly by rejecting the division, by rejecting the cynicism.
Among the 46 candidates vying for the governor's seat was 69-year-old lawyer and author Larry Elder. In his concession speech last night, Newsom's leading Republican challenger told voters to accept defeat graciously.
We recognize that we lost the battle, but we are certainly going to win the war.
All right, let's bring in Major Garrett in Sacramento. So, Major, on Monday at the governor's rally, President Biden told voters what happens in California could shape the country's direction on the pandemic, reproductive rights, and the battle to slow climate change. So now we have those results. What does it mean for those issues moving forward?
Well, it means that they have momentum certainly here in California and quite possibly elsewhere. Look, the results of the California recall election are not going to fundamentally change what governors are doing in other states. They're basically making their decisions either to be restrictive in terms of mask or vaccine mandates or testing requirements, or they're not going to be. Gavin Newsom's landslide victory here isn't going to change Ron DeSantis' mind as governor of Florida, or anyone else who's on that side of the political spectrum. But it may, in fact, tell Democrats who have similar policies in their states two things. One, that they are politically resilient, meaning you can take a punch, as Governor Newsom did here in California with a full-fledged recall campaign against him, and prevail. Also, because those policies differ so dramatically with Republicans in the Trumpian wing of the Republican Party, you can also say this is not just about a debate over science or data. It's a debate about underlying ideology and everything that flows into it. And Gavin Newsom made a very strong argument here in California that the Trump-influenced Republican ideology not only doesn't fit here in California, but it doesn't fit and ought not to fit nationwide. So everything in this election kind of crystallized around the pandemic, but there were related issues that also came to the fore. And with this landslide victory, Gavin Newsom can communicate to other Democrats, take a look at what I did, take a look at the rigors of this campaign, and see if those apply in your state in the midterm election or swing congressional district.
So I want to ask you about Larry Elder, who was sort of the leading Republican in this race. He conceded. He said, stay tuned. And he said that his campaign pressured Democrats in the state of California to maybe change direction moving forward. What did he mean by that?
I'm not sure what he meant by that, because Gavin Newsom, the governor, hasn't said, well, I've been chastened by this recall. He said he's been humbled, said he's learned things, but that he's going to stay with the policies that he's put in place dealing with the pandemic and every other issue. He took some heat on his approach to climate change. He took some heat on his approach to criminal justice reform in this state and the underlying economics of California. Governor Newsom has said, I'm going to stick with what I've done. I believe in that record. I'm going to keep those policies. But more to the point, Larry Elder, who entered this race late, July, one of the latest entrants into the race, because of his platform as a nationally syndicated columnist and talk show host and his alignment in general with Trumpian Republican ideology, he rose to the very top of the Republican field, besting other more, they would argue, qualified and experienced Republicans like the former two mayor of San Diego, Kevin Faulconer, John Cox, an independently wealthy businessman who ran against Newsom in 2018, lost handily, but had been in this fray before. Elder blew them away. He got more than 2 million votes in this, and he looks to be the odds-on favorite, should he choose to pursue it, to become the Republican nominee against Newsom in next year's gubernatorial election. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is the underlying politics of California aren't going to change in one calendar year. This is still a lopsidedly, decidedly, and intentionally progressive Democratic state. and the results of the recall election underscore that. So yes, Larry Elder now has a clear path to become the Republican nominee. He does not have a clear path to defeating Governor Newsom.
Yeah, and Major, on that point of Larry Elder's ability to sort of leapfrog over other candidates, perhaps some more qualified, perhaps some less, is also sort of interesting in that, you know, perhaps there are some people in states like California, which leans blue, where they are more wary about what happened in 2016. In other words, having somebody who's a neophyte in politics, whose really only background is either television or, in this case, you know, radio, coming to the fore. I get that there are some people who like populists and who are rejecting people who've been in the swamp for many years, but I wonder what this portends for somebody on the national level. You say that Larry Elder still has that ability to galvanize voters, but could he do it at a national level, and could others like him continue to follow the path that former President Trump set?
It's interesting you asked me that, Vlad. I was with Larry Elder in his home high in the Hollywood Hills Sunday morning. And near the end of our conversation, he said, you know what? It would be easier for me to be elected president of the United States than governor of California. I know that. California is not the place where I can win a statewide race necessarily. It's a very, very tough slog here. But that he was even thinking about what his possible role in national politics might be will tell you something, and did tell me something, about his very short-lived experience here in this recall election. He raised more than $10 million in a very short period of time, had no problem asking people for money and having them give it to him, put together a campaign, the rudiments of one, and he enjoyed it. He told me he thinks his life has changed. He wants to no longer discuss politics, talk about it in the peanut gallery seat of talk radio, but actually participate in it. Well, what does that mean? Well, if he's going to stay here in California, it means a very tough slog ahead, for sure. But it raises a fundamental question for the Republican Party, not just here in California, but nationally. Does the Trumpian Republican, who is likely to win primary contests in 2022 and 2024, actually have a chance of winning in contested congressional districts or contested statewide races, meaning where it's not a decidedly red, Trumpian-influenced state or political geography? That's the question, because yes, Larry Elder now is the odds-on favorite by far to win the Republican nomination if he wants it against Gavin Newsom. But what do you get with that? Well, you maybe get another 2-to-1 shellacking like he did in the recall. So what's the point? Well, other Republicans who were in this race, rapidly bested by Larry Elder, kept saying, don't fall for Larry Elder. Don't go in this Trumpian direction. Why? Because you can't win. You've got to have more moderate Republicans who are not as strident and who can at least demonstrate some ability to win Democratic voters. Kevin Faulconer, the former two-term mayor of San Diego, said, look, San Diego's registration mirrors California's, 24% Republican. And yet he won re-election, and he won election and then re-election in San Diego, and said to me, that proves I can get Democratic and independent votes. I'm the kind of Republican this party needs. Well, Kevin Faulconer got 8% in this race. Larry Elder completely blew him out of the water. So California Republicans, having a conversation of that kind, said, nope, we want someone who sounds like a populist, someone who tries to sound like Donald Trump, someone who has positions that are aggressive and staunchly conservative, and we'll take what comes with it. Well, what came with it is a landslide victory for the governor.
Very interesting, Major. Thank you very much.